The rot began not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper, a quiet poison that coiled through the hallowed halls of St. Jude's Priory, smelling of incense but choking the soul. Her habit strains at the seams. She's pale every morning. There's a new roundness to her face. One nun's affliction is a pity, a second's, a coincidence. But when the fourth innocent Sister Agnes crumpled to the stone floor during evening prayer, her hand clutching her stomach, her apology a strangled breath, "I'm sorry, Father." The whisper became a roar the truth could no longer ignore. The women were pregnant, and no one could explain how. The year was 1980. The village of Oakwood was the kind of place that time forgot. Quiet, sun-baked, nestled between rolling hills and mist-laced woods in northern New Hampshire. It had no hospital, no police station, not even a stoplight. Just a school, a bakery, and a chapel. And that chapel, St. Jude's, was the soul of it all. A white stone church with blood-red windows, surrounded by flower beds and silence. It was the place people were born into, baptized in, and buried by. It was also the last place anyone expected a scandal. So when the rumors spread that four nuns had become mysteriously pregnant, the village didn't know what to do. They whispered behind closed doors. They stared from windows. They showed up to Mass not for prayer, but for proof. But the biggest shock wasn't that the sisters were expecting. It was that they wouldn't say a word about how it happened. Father Michael was 42 at the time, silver-haired, soft-voiced, and fiercely respected. He had served Oakwood for 19 years, starting as a young seminary graduate and slowly becoming more than a priest, a symbol of peace, structure, and moral clarity. His sermons were poetic. His discipline was firm but fair. He had no enemies, no scandals, not even a parking ticket. So when the first nun showed signs of pregnancy, Father Michael was devastated. When the second did, he wept. By the third, he begged the diocese to investigate, but the Vatican sent no one. No one came. And by the fourth sister, Agnes, he stopped asking. He simply prayed. The sisters Clara, Maria, Isabella, and Agnes were moved to a private wing of the priory for health reasons, they said, but no one bought it. Villagers began showing up near the gates at night just to watch. Reporters from New York sniffed their way to Oakwood and were quickly turned away. Then one morning in mid-June, just as mysteriously as the pregnancies had appeared, all four women vanished. No goodbyes, no notes, no footprints, no cries. The beds were cold, the sheets were folded, the doors were locked from the inside. Gone. The chapel didn't hold a memorial. Father Michael didn't speak of it. The church gave no statement. A week later, the priory closed for renovations. The story was buried, not just metaphorically, but physically. Newspaper archives removed, diaries confiscated, families warned. The village moved on, or pretended to, until 10 years later when an old maintenance worker, restoring the chapel basement for a historical grant, pulled up a cracked slab of stone and found something that made him vomit on sight. The slab was thick, old, cracked with time. Beneath it, just a few inches down, was something not meant to be touched again, not meant to ever be seen. The worker's name was David Miller, 67 years old, arthritic, half-blind in one eye. He'd been called to restore the undercroft beneath St. Jude's for a state-funded preservation grant. The church had recently decided to reopen the priory wing as a historical site, or so they claimed. He didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But the air down there was wrong. Too still, too thick, like the walls were holding their breath. He was scraping near the far end, just behind the altar's foundation, when the chisel struck something hollow. He paused, scraped again. Hollow. Definitely hollow. And beneath the faint echo, the unmistakable rattle of old dry bone. At first they assumed it was a single body, maybe a priest from centuries ago, interred beneath the chapel in forgotten tradition. But when the county coroner arrived and they carefully lifted the stone, they discovered four partial skeletons, all adult women, curled into fetal positions. Beside each one, a single object, a rosary. Each rosary had a name inscribed: Clara, Maria, Isabella, Agnes. The news exploded through Oakwood like wildfire doused in gasoline. 10 years of uneasy silence cracked open overnight. People who once whispered about scandal now stood outside the chapel in the dozens, demanding answers. And at the center of the storm was one man, the only man who had been there through it all, Father Michael. Now 52, the priest looked nearly 20 years older than he had a decade ago. His hair was entirely white. His voice, when heard, was raspy and quiet. He didn't hide. He didn't run. He simply said, "I have nothing to confess." But no one believed him. The diocese launched an internal inquiry. A special forensic team was brought in, and Oakwood became the center of one of the most unusual cold cases in modern church history. Every resident was interviewed. Dozens of former church employees were tracked down, and yet nothing. No fingerprints, no blood, no clear cause of death, no sign of trauma. It was as if the women had simply lain down, curled up, and died. Peacefully, quietly, together. But then came the journal. Hidden behind a loose brick in the old nuns' quarters, preserved by the dry air, yellowed with time, was a slim, leather-bound book. It wasn't labeled, but the handwriting was delicate, careful. Sister Isabella. The entries began 4 months before the pregnancies. They were normal at first. Prayers, routines, small frustrations. Then something shifted. He visits more often now. He always brings tea. He says God gives second chances to the lonely. And then, "I know it's wrong, but it feels like love." He promised we'd be safe. Clara's showing signs now too. The final entry read, "He says he'll protect us, that this is sacred, but something in his eyes, it changed. I think we made a mistake." The journal was enough to reopen the case publicly. The media returned. TV crews camped outside. National papers printed headlines. The Oakwood Four, pregnant nuns and a priest's silence. Still, Father Michael said nothing. No interviews, no sermons, just daily walks through the churchyard, alone, silent, as if waiting for something. And then on the 10th anniversary of the day the nuns vanished, he did something no one expected. He scheduled a funeral mass for all 4 women, and he invited the entire town. The chapel was packed that evening. People stood shoulder to shoulder, packed into pews and aisles, breathless, waiting. Father Michael stood at the pulpit, silent for nearly a full minute. Then he looked up and said, 10 years ago, 4 women trusted me, and I failed them." The chapel was completely silent. Father Michael's voice, once commanding, now trembled under the weight of his words. 10 years ago, 4 women trusted me, and I failed them." Gasps echoed through the room. Some stood frozen, others instinctively crossed themselves. But what followed wasn't a confession, not fully. He spoke of the pressure, the shame, the church's silence, how he begged the diocese to send help when the pregnancies emerged, and how they responded with nothing but silence. He painted himself as a man abandoned by the very system he served. "I tried to protect them. I prayed night after night. I begged for answers I never got. And then, one by one, they disappeared." He paused. "And now they are found, but answers remain buried." Outside the church, opinion was split. Some believed Michael. Others saw right through the performance. The funeral mass did one thing, though. It put the case back in the public eye. Detectives from the state cold case unit were brought in, and this time, they weren't interested in spiritual answers. They wanted evidence. They searched every inch of the church, the priory, and the rectory where Michael had lived. What they found was unsettling. Behind the library wall was a narrow crawl space, a hidden corridor sealed from both ends. Inside it, discarded habits, stained prayer books, and a small mattress, threadbare and used. It hadn't been mentioned in any church blueprints, a space never meant to exist. DNA samples taken from the items were sent to the lab. Meanwhile, the town buzzed with questions. Who had used that room? Was it where the sisters had stayed before vanishing? Or was it where someone had hidden them? The diary entries kept surfacing. Investigators discovered another journal. This one belonged to Sister Maria. He told me it was love. He said he'd never touched anyone before, that I was chosen. But now Clara won't speak to me. She's afraid. I don't think we're the only ones. A pattern was emerging, but there were still no hard facts. No fingerprints on the rosaries, no signs of trauma on the bones, no official charges to press, and the village once again began to turn on itself. A former housekeeper named Sarah came forward anonymously. She used to clean the priory and rectory, and she remembered things. Late-night footsteps, whispers behind closed doors, and a strange schedule that made no sense. 4 nuns visiting the priest's quarters on separate days and always leaving quietly. She never saw anything directly, but she remembered the fear in their eyes, especially Agnes's. She looked at me once, like she wanted to scream, but she didn't. She just nodded and walked away. As the investigation deepened, one question returned again and again. Why didn't they speak up? Why didn't any of the sisters ever expose the truth? Why hide it? Why protect it? Or who were they afraid of? One day an envelope was slid beneath the rectory door. No postage, no return address, just a small handwritten note inside. You'll never find what's buried under guilt. And taped to the bottom a photograph. Blurry, faded, but clear enough to see. 5 people. 4 women in habits, and in the middle, a man in priest robes, smiling, his hand resting on Sister Isabella's shoulder. The date scribbled on the back. May 3rd, 1980, 6 weeks before the disappearances. The man in the photo wasn't Father Michael. He was someone else entirely. A visiting priest, young, tall, dark-haired. There had been no record of any other clergy assigned to Oakwood at the time. But now someone new had entered the frame. Someone whose name had been wiped from church logs. Someone who had once stood smiling, right in the center of the tragedy. The photograph changed everything. It arrived without a sound, without a name, just slipped under the rectory door like a forgotten sin. 4 nuns, 1 unfamiliar priest, all smiling. Except Isabella. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked tense, like she knew something, like she didn't belong in that moment or didn't want to be there at all. But the man in the middle, radiating charm, confident, young, hands resting gently on both shoulders. And most importantly, not Father Michael. Detectives scoured diocesan archives for any record of visiting clergy in the spring of 1980. At first, nothing came up, but then tucked away in an old filing cabinet in the state bishop's office was a faded memo dated April 10th, 1980. It mentioned a temporary transfer to Oakwood Parish. Name, Father Thomas S. Andrew. Duration, April 15th to June 8th, 1980. No other details, no reasons listed, just 2 months. And then, nothing. When they asked Father Michael about Andrew, he hesitated for the first time. Yes, he came for a short time, said he was here for sabbatical reflection. Very charismatic, always quoting scripture. He paused. The sisters liked him. He didn't say anything more, but his knuckles turned white around the edge of the pew as he spoke. A deeper investigation revealed something chilling. Father Thomas Andrew had been transferred 5 times in 3 years. Each parish he'd served in had filed no formal complaints. Each had records wiped or redacted. And in each case, female parishioners, often young, vulnerable, or within the convent, had left the order soon after. Nothing criminal, but the pattern was poisonous. In Oakwood, Andrew was remembered vaguely. Only one elderly villager, a florist named Mrs. Gable, recalled him. He bought white lilies every Tuesday, she said. Said they were for the altar, but he always asked for them to be wrapped discreetly. I thought it strange at the time. He had left town quietly, right before the nuns vanished, right before the priory shut down, right before the silence began. That's when the second envelope arrived. This one wasn't dropped at the church. It was sent anonymously to Detective Miller, the lead investigator. Inside, a cassette tape unlabeled, no return address. They found an old player, pressed play, and what emerged was a whispered, shaky voice. A woman's, barely above a breath. If anyone hears this, please, don't let them say we ran. We didn't run. We were taken. He said it was holy. He said the child would be blessed. But it's not holy. It's a cage. We're not safe. Not from him. Not from the other one. The voice cut off with a sharp bang, like a door slamming. It was Sister Agnes's voice. Without question. Voice analysis confirmed it. But how had the tape survived? Who had sent it? Why now, a decade later? And who was the other one? Detectives began digging into the church's basement further. Not just the gravesite beneath the stone slab, but the hidden passages nearby. One led to a sealed confessional booth, and beneath the booth platform, they found a rusted locked box. Inside, a notebook. Torn pages, illegible ink in many places, but what they could read was haunting, written in male handwriting. 4 flowers, all ripe for picking. They look to me for grace. I give them touch. The youngest bleeds when she prays. She said she sees angels now. I warned him not to intervene. I warned him. He doesn't listen. No one listens. But they'll understand once the silence begins. The implication was obvious. Someone in the church, possibly Andrew, had documented these horrific thoughts. But there was a twist. The page was dated after Andrew had officially left Oakwood, June 20th, 2 weeks after the disappearances. If he was gone, who wrote it? Or was he never really gone at all? The questions kept piling up, but one thing became increasingly clear. The disappearances weren't just about scandal. They were deliberate, coordinated, covered. Someone knew how to hide the truth, and someone still alive didn't want it uncovered. The notebook set off alarm bells at every level. It wasn't just disturbing, it was deliberate. Someone had written these thoughts with clarity, almost pride. But more chilling than the words was the handwriting. When compared with old church documents, prayer logs, and signed letters from the period, the results came back with a 90% match. Not to Andrew, not to a stranger, but to Father Michael himself. Detective Miller stared at the report like it had been printed in fire. She'd wanted to believe the older priest, the one who held the funeral, who wept at the altar, who said he failed the women but never harmed them. But if this notebook truly belonged to him, then everything shifted. It didn't mean guilt, not yet, but it cracked the mask. The team brought Michael in for formal questioning. He sat in a small room, hands folded, eyes heavy with something unreadable. When they placed the notebook in front of him, he didn't flinch. "That's not mine," he said. "I've never written those words." His voice was even, controlled, but his fingers twitched once, then stilled. Miller leaned forward. She didn't accuse, not directly. "Then who do you think wrote it?" He looked up slowly and whispered, almost inaudibly, "I prayed they'd never find that." A silence filled the room, heavy, awkward. And then he added, "Because if they did, he'd know I told, and he'd come back." That night, Father Michael checked himself into a private Catholic mental care facility outside the county. His lawyer said he was experiencing religious trauma, but the timing was too precise, too clean, almost as if he knew something else was coming. Back in Oakwood, Miller's team tore through church records again. They examined private correspondence, old surveillance logs, handwritten sermons, anything. And buried in a locked drawer in the chapel office was a single postcard, faded and dusty. On the front, a picture of St. Bartholomew's Monastery in upstate New York. On the back, 3 words, "You buried truth." No return address, no name, but the postmark, 1981, 1 year after the nuns vanished. And the handwriting, a perfect match to Father Thomas Andrew. So Andrew hadn't vanished, not completely. Someone in the church had kept tabs on him, or perhaps protected him. They found his name once in an obscure seminar attendee list in 1986, and once more, barely visible, in a hospital check-in log in 1983. But each time they got close, the trail ended. He was a ghost. Meanwhile, more journals surfaced. Sister Clara's entries had been hidden in a hollowed-out hymnal found behind a false back in the chapel choir loft. Her words were raw, fearful. "He visits at night now. We lock the doors, but somehow he's always there, like he lives in the walls." Agnes says she heard whispering from the pulpit. "Not Michael, someone else. It's not love. Not anymore. It never was. He calls it divine, but it feels like drowning. Isabella says, if we tell, we disappear. I think she's right. The entry stopped one day before the nuns vanished, and tucked inside the back cover, scribbled hastily, was a short line. We buried it beneath the red window, all four, so the light would remember us. That cryptic sentence led investigators to re-examine the stained glass above the altar, a crimson-colored rose window known locally as the blood bloom. Behind it was a narrow ledge, accessible only from the roof, and there, hidden behind centuries of dust, they found a folded cloth, wrapped tightly around something hard. Inside, a locket, tiny, silver, worn, engraved with a single name, Isabella. Inside the locket, two things, a scrap of paper with the initials TSA and a photograph, grainy, black and white, of a crib. But the child in the crib, it had his eyes, Andrew's. For the first time, they had undeniable evidence. Not just of manipulation, not just of spiritual abuse, but a child. Proof that at least one nun had carried a pregnancy to full term. But where was the child now? Had the others carried to term too? Had any of them survived? Or had the church buried more than just bones? The photograph of the child changed the investigation. Until now, the focus had been on the women, on their disappearances, on the possible murder, on the silence of the church. But now investigators faced a more haunting question. Where is the child? DNA testing on the locket was slow, degraded over time, and tainted by exposure. But the results were clear enough. The hair caught in the hinge belonged to a female. The age range matched an infant, and the DNA profile, a partial match to Sister Isabella, which meant she'd given birth. And she had kept the child long enough to leave this behind. And someone at some point had taken that child. But there was no record of a baby ever being born at the priory. No hospital entries, no midwife reports, no baptismal certificates. The church offered no help, no comment. Then a strange development. An anonymous tip came through to the sheriff's office. A woman claimed to be in possession of a sealed letter written by a dying nun who had once served in Oakwood. She refused to give her name. She insisted on speaking only to Detective Miller. They met at a roadside diner one town over. The woman, mid-30s, pale, nervous, handed over the envelope and walked out before Miller could ask a single question. The letter inside was yellowed and shaky, written in blue ink with a trembling hand. My name is Sister Catherine. I served in Oakwood from 1978 to 1981. I was not part of the four, but I knew. We all did. We just didn't speak. We were told not to. They said it would bring shame to the church, that we would be excommunicated. When Isabella gave birth, it was in the underground chapel. Father Andrew delivered the child himself. I heard her scream. I heard the baby cry. But when I came to check later that night, there was no baby, no crib, no Isabella. Only Father Michael sitting in the pews, eyes open, staring at nothing. He looked like a man who had seen hell and couldn't leave it. This was the first time someone had directly placed both Andrew and Michael in the same moment, on the same night the child was allegedly born. Could they have worked together? Could Michael, all these years, have been covering for Andrew? Or had he been manipulated too? More questions than answers. But Miller pressed forward. She began to cross-reference adoption records, looking for children born between March and June of 1980, anywhere within a 100-mile radius of Oakwood. Out of 61 births listed during that time, only one stood out. A baby girl surrendered anonymously to a Catholic shelter in Boston. No parents listed, no history, just a note pinned to the blanket. She is of God. Let her be safe. The child had been adopted 6 months later. Her name was changed. No traceable connection to the church. But when Miller finally tracked her down, now a 25-year-old woman living in Maine, the resemblance to Isabella was uncanny. Same cheekbones, same eyes, same calm gaze. Her name was Anna Hayes, and she had no idea. Anna agreed to a private meeting. She didn't believe it at first. Who would? But when shown the photo of the locket, her breath caught. I've seen this in my dreams. This crib, that window, the red light. She broke down crying. Something deep inside her remembered. Something she could never explain until now. A DNA test confirmed it. Anna Hayes was the biological daughter of Sister Isabella. She had survived, she was real, and now unknowingly had walked back into the storm that birthed her. That night, Detective Miller sat alone in the chapel, the lights off, the pews cold, the stained glass casting red shadows across the stone. She stared at the altar and whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Why didn't they run?" And a voice, soft, almost inaudible, echoed in her mind, "Because they thought they were safe." Anna Hayes sat quietly in the old pew. The chapel was smaller than she imagined. Ancient stones, cold walls, a ceiling that groaned under its own weight. This was where she was born, where her mother lived, where 4 women vanished. And somehow she had found her way back, like a shadow returning to its source. Detective Miller watched her from a distance. Anna had taken the news with eerie calm. She didn't scream, didn't run, just nodded, almost as if a part of her had always known, deep in her bones, that her life didn't start where she thought it did, that the answers lay in the silence of this place. Anna walked the grounds for hours. She paused near the old garden wall, now overgrown with moss. Something about the layout felt familiar, like a dream half remembered. Then she spotted it, a carving on one of the stones. Clara. She ran her fingers across the letters, barely legible through the moss, and just beneath it, a second name, Isabella. The garden wall wasn't just a boundary, it was a memorial, an unspoken grave. That night, Anna stayed in the village. Miller offered her a room at the rectory, but Anna declined. Instead, she found an old boarding house run by a retired teacher named Martha. Martha, as it turned out, had once taught all 4 nuns in Sunday school, back when they were just girls in white dresses, laughing in the village square. She remembered Isabella best. Smartest of them all, quiet, kind. But there was something in her eyes near the end, something broken. She asked me once if God ever made mistakes. I told her no. Now I'm not so sure. Anna spent the next day digging through archives, church records, newspaper clippings, obituaries. But what struck her most was what wasn't there. No mention of the nuns' pregnancies, no funerals, no official investigations. It was like the church had erased them, wiped away their existence not just from faith, but from history. Miller arranged a second meeting with Father Michael, now staying under pastoral protection at the secluded facility. He looked tired, thin, like a man slowly unthreading. But when Anna walked in, something shifted in his face. He stared at her, not with surprise but recognition. "You're hers," he whispered. "You look like her. Same eyes." Anna didn't waste time. "Did you know what happened? Did you see it?" Michael nodded barely, but he didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "I tried to stop him, but I was weak and afraid. He said it was sacred. He said they'd be martyrs." Anna's voice broke. "Who? Andrew?" Michael didn't answer, but tears slid down his face. Later that night, Miller went over Michael's old sermons, hundreds of them. In one, dated just a week before the nuns disappeared, a strange passage stood out. "The rose blooms for those who bleed in silence, and the garden buries what the church cannot confess." The garden, where Anna had seen the names. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. Late into the night, they scanned the soil behind the garden wall, and what they found chilled them to the core. 3 disturbances, 3 plots, side by side. Not coffins, not deep, but large enough to hold human remains. The next morning, excavation began. Within hours, 3 more bodies were uncovered, skeletal, decomposed, wrapped in tattered cloth, each holding a rosary, each with initials carved into a scrap of wood: M.C.A., Maria, Clara, Agnes. Only one was missing: Isabella. The horror deepened. The original gravesite beneath the altar had clearly been a decoy, the church's attempt to close the case quietly. But this was deliberate, a secret kept in the soil, hidden in holy ground. And then came the final twist. Tucked between the ribs of one of the bodies, wrapped in wax paper, was a confession, handwritten, shaky, unsigned. "We were promised peace. We were told this was divine. But now he says we must go, for God's plan to be fulfilled." He weeps when he says it, but his hands never shake. He says the blood will be cleansed by holy soil. I think he means to kill us. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting, a match for Isabella. They buried the 3 recovered bodies with full honors. No longer anonymous, no longer hidden. Maria, Clara, Agnes. Their names were etched into new marble stones beneath the stained glass that once watched them pray. But even as the town gathered to mourn, one question haunted everyone. Where was Isabella? She was the heart of the story now, the only nun unaccounted for, the only one confirmed to have given birth, the only one who'd left behind a daughter who'd unknowingly carried the weight of the story in her blood, and the only one whose body remained unfound. Anna refused to leave. She walked the grounds every day, retracing her mother's final days, her footsteps, her habits, her prayers. She started wearing a rosary of her own, not from faith, but remembrance. Then something strange happened. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Anna wandered into the unused east wing of the chapel, a section that had long been sealed off due to structural damage. Sunlight poured through cracked glass windows, dust swirling like memory. She paused near an old confessional booth and noticed a panel slightly ajar. Inside, nestled in the corner, was a loose floorboard. Under it, a locked wooden box. And inside that box, photographs. Old black and white pictures. Not of the village, not of the chapel, but of a cabin, secluded, wooden, surrounded by pine trees and cliffs. In every photograph, the same figure appeared. A woman in a nun's habit, heavily pregnant, standing just outside the cabin's door. One photo had a name scratched on the back. Isabella. The photos were dated June 15, 1980, 2 weeks after the nuns officially vanished. Isabella had been alive, hidden, watched, and someone had been with her, taking these photos. Anna brought them to Miller immediately. They cross-referenced the landscape. It matched a known stretch of abandoned forest 30 miles north, near the cliffs of Blackwater Creek. Church-owned land, long since forgotten. They mobilized a team, and within a day, they found it. The cabin stood exactly as it had in the photos. Rotten beams, broken windows, wild vines claiming the wood. But inside, untouched, as if frozen in time, a single cot, a stained Bible, a ceramic mug on the windowsill still faintly etched with the letter I. And in the center of the room, a floor hatch. Miller opened it carefully, heart pounding. A ladder led down into the earth, a cold crawl space barely 4 feet high. And there, in the corner, was a wrapped shape. Blankets, cloth, rosaries strung over it. Time had decayed the body, but the rosary was unmistakable. Its cross was engraved with the same initials found in Isabella's locket. I.R. Isabella Rossi. She had been hidden, not buried, preserved, protected. But why? And by whom? An envelope lay nearby. Inside it, a final letter, addressed not to the church, not to the priest, but to Anna. To my daughter, if this ever finds you, know that you were not a sin. You were my salvation. I stayed alive as long as I could. I prayed they would let me raise you. But when they said no, I begged. He cried, Anna! He cried as he closed the door. But he still walked away. Forgive me for not fighting harder. Forgive me for not surviving. But remember this. You were loved before you ever breathed. Anna clutched the letter to her chest. For the first time she cried, not for herself, but for a mother who had been silenced, buried, forgotten, yet who never stopped trying to leave her something, even if it was just this one message. The state officially closed the case the following month. Maria, Clara, Agnes, and Isabella were formally acknowledged as victims of abuse and homicide. The church released a short statement. No apology, no responsibility, just a line. We pray for their souls. But for Detective Miller, Anna, and the people of Oakwood, the story was not over. Because there was still one piece missing, still one thread untied. What happened to Father Thomas Andrew? Where had he gone? And who had protected him? Miller returned to Father Michael one final time. When she asked again about Andrew, he said nothing for several minutes. Then quietly, almost reverently, he's where angels go when they fall. Buried, but not dead. Detective Miller sat across from Father Michael for what would be the final time. This time, she didn't bring evidence. No photographs, no reports, no recordings. Just one name, Thomas Andrew. The moment she said it, something inside the old priest collapsed. His eyes fell, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than ever. "You've been protecting him," Miller said. "All this time." Michael didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor and whispered, "It started with God, but it ended with him." What followed wasn't a statement. It was a confession. The real story. The one no one had dared tell. Back in 1978, Father Thomas Andrew arrived at Oakwood as a visiting priest from the Southern Diocese. He was charismatic, intense, deeply devout, and something about him mesmerized people, especially the young women at the priory. He spoke of divine connection, of the holy nature of love, of sacrifice as a sacred act. He preached sermons laced with poetry and mystery. And when he looked at you, it felt like he was seeing into your soul. To the young, he seemed like a prophet. To Michael, who was then just 39 and deeply unsure of himself, Andrew was both a mentor and a storm. It began innocently. Late-night talks, spiritual questions, shared prayers. Then came the private meetings, the vows of silence, the claims that love, when sanctified by God, knows no sin. He told each of them they were chosen, that their bodies were vessels of holiness. That conception was not lust, it was divine calling. They didn't know he was saying the same things to each of them. By 1980, all four nuns, Isabella, Clara, Maria, and Agnes, were pregnant. It was Isabella who first realized the truth, that they weren't special, that they were being manipulated. She confronted Andrew and he snapped. He didn't scream. He didn't hit her. He simply looked her in the eyes and said, "If you expose this, you condemn your sisters. If you tell, they die." Isabella went silent, but Andrew knew it wouldn't last, so he began planning. One by one, he isolated the women, told them the church was going to remove them, said their babies would be taken away. He offered a way out, a place of rest, a temporary retreat in the countryside where they could prepare for their role in God's greater plan. That cabin in the woods, it wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap. He brought them there under the guise of protection. He fed them, prayed with them, and when the moment came, he poisoned them. Slow, gentle, almost painless. 3 of them died peacefully. But Isabella, she didn't drink the tea, she ran. And that's when Michael stepped in. He had suspected things for weeks. He'd followed Andrew that night, and he found Isabella in the woods, sobbing, terrified, carrying her newborn. She begged him to help, and he did. He took her back to the cabin, tended to her, fed her, listened to her story, and when Andrew returned, Michael made a choice. He knelt before him and lied. "She's gone. She died. I buried her." But in truth, he hadn't. He helped Isabella hide, built a room beneath the cabin floor, smuggled food when he could. But Andrew grew suspicious. He returned weeks later, demanded proof, and Michael broke. He drugged Isabella while she slept, left the child outside the chapel door in Boston, and sealed the crawl space with bricks and wood. "I told myself I was saving her, that it was the only way, but I buried her alive." Miller couldn't breathe. "Why didn't you come forward?" Michael laughed bitterly. "Because no one would believe me. Not against him, not then. He disappeared, you know? Not just from Oakwood, from everywhere. The church moved him, protected him, hid him under new names. And me? They told me to forget." But Miller had one final question. "Where is he now?" Michael looked her dead in the eye. "Buried, under the chapel. No gravestone, no marker, but he's there." They dug. That night, beneath the choir loft, behind the sealed stone wall, they found a hidden tomb. Inside it, a rotted priest's robe, a silver cross, and a skull. Father Thomas Andrew had been dead for nearly a decade. Michael had killed him. "It wasn't justice," he told Miller. "It was fear." Oakwood had always been quiet, but now it was silent. Not the peaceful kind, the breathless kind, the kind that comes just after a scream. The truth was out. 4 women, groomed and betrayed. A priest worshipped as holy, exposed as a predator. Another priest, once revered, now a confessed murderer and accomplice. The chapel, once a house of God, had become a graveyard of secrets. Anna stood inside St. Jude's, holding the letter her mother wrote, the one found beside her body in the crawl space. It was stained with time, nearly falling apart at the folds. But the ink had lasted. So had the love. "You were not a sin. You were my salvation." She whispered it aloud one last time, like a prayer. Father Michael, now under protective custody, awaited trial. But Anna didn't hate him. He had been a coward, yes, but also a man drowning in fear, guilt, and sorrow. And in his own broken way, he had tried to preserve what little hope remained. He buried a woman, yes, but he spared a child, and that child had now returned to finish what no one else could. The village of Oakwood changed after the truth. People stopped calling it a quiet place. They started calling it a place of reckoning. Tourists came, reporters too. The Vatican issued a new investigation, a symbolic gesture more than anything. But for those who lived there, the scars were real. Anna didn't stay. She left after the memorial, a new gravestone beside the others, one that simply read, Isabella Rossi, Mother, Martyr, Light. She took nothing from the village except her mother's rosary and the photo of her as a young woman, smiling in a garden. But Anna did leave something behind, a plaque mounted near the chapel gate. It reads, "In memory of the women who were silenced, may their truth speak for generations." Detective Miller filed her final report. Her last entry said, "Some wounds don't bleed." They echo, "This case will never fully close because you cannot close what was never meant to be hidden." But the truth is here now, for them, for Anna, for the rest of us, and the silence is over. A year later, a small foundation was formed, the Isabella Trust. It supports survivors of abuse in religious institutions. Its motto, "Loved before you ever breathed." The chapel now stands empty. No priests, no sermons, no choir. But every Sunday, fresh flowers appear on the graves of Maria, Clara, Agnes, and Isabella. No one knows who brings them, but those who live nearby say that sometimes in the quiet hours just before dawn, they hear 4 voices, soft, sweet, and singing. Not hymns, not requiems, just peace,